welcome to the first or latest of our GA Coach webinar series. Tonight we have a new innovation for ourselves. We have two speakers. So we have Cliodhna O'Connor and Orlaith Curran, both of whom are going to speak on the topic of coaching the female athlete. So over the next 40 or 45 minutes or so, Cliodhna and Orlaith are going to present. But what they've done today is a bit different from previous sessions. They've taken a lot of the questions that came in earlier from you, the audience, and they've built them into the presentation that they have. So instead of doing a presentation and then answering questions, they're going to be answering a lot of the questions as we go through. And if there are further questions for anybody that they want to ask, if you recall, if you've been here before, we have the Q&A function, which is in the little call out button with a question mark through it on the right hand side of your screen. So Cliodhna, over to you to start.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for the intro, and thanks for having myself and Orla here. As Peter said, so Orla's controlling the slides and I'm doing the talking, and Orla's going to come in the second half of the presentation and take the second half. So you might hear me asking her to click on to the next one. So hopefully it all goes well, and we've put all the cats and dogs on notice in the neighbourhood to be quiet. So again, hopefully that goes well too. So as Peter said, we're talking tonight about coaching the female athlete, and I suppose let's start with one thing. So what we're not saying is that there's only one way to coach female athletes and it has to be different to males. That is absolutely not the message that we're saying. But what we do want to explore and discuss and reflect upon is that are there social, cultural and physical differences between male and females that maybe we should be taking into consideration? And do we have preconceived notions about male athletes and female athletes that maybe we end up treating them differently when there's no need? So it's trying to figure out, well, when is there differences and when is everything equal, and how we deal with that as a coach. And just like every other aspect of coaching, very often there isn't a black and white answer, a yes or a no. It's case specific and it's context specific. But we're going to explore a lot of those, I suppose, a lot of those questions or things today. So when we started talking about this, we were myself and Orla were just reflecting on the female dressing room and what is it like, and what is it, how is it different, and what are some of the usual frustrations or issues that coaches have, or that we've had ourselves. And you'll see in the slide in front of you different examples or different sentences we've heard in dressing rooms. So like, why don't they go for the ball? They're not going for the ball. They're not getting it. They don't understand what I'm saying. Why won't she put her body on the line? Is she afraid of contact? She's not aggressive enough. Or they won't call each other out. They've got to take ownership. It has to come from them, and they won't do it. And all those frustrations, and I've had them as a coach of female athletes, and that sort of, I can't seem to draw that out of players, and that has been frustrating for me at times. And then from an actual kind of sideline point of view, or very much in the context of a game, coaches saying, get out there and get in her face, or send her into next week, or be aggressive, and often that falls flat on its face in a female dressing room. And I suppose what we want to challenge or discuss is none of that means that females aren't competitive or ambitious or able for physicality or able to hold themselves to high standards, but maybe it's how we communicate it and how we set it up is the challenge, or is where we need to approach things differently. So maybe think about these differences. So on the left hand side of your screen, so we've got a hurler. And on the right hand side we've got a female footballer. So left hand side, just reflect on these. Now these are generalizations, but I think it's useful to think about them. So the male athlete can be more physical, more aggressive. Sometimes the female athlete, they struggle to show that physicality, might be a little bit reluctant. Think of schoolyards, young lads in big groups and playing, all chasing around after a football, and the females maybe smaller groups, 4 or 5, little chatting away in smaller groups. Lads tend to leave it on the pitch. They can call each other out, probably give each other a box, and then walk off, and it's all grand. But with females, they tend to, you know, that can be carried into the dressing room and, oh my God, did you see what Mary did at training? And all of a sudden 2 days later and it's still going on. Lads maybe bring in competitiveness. It's maybe it's easier for them to step forward and to step into the limelight and say, I want to be competitive and I want to be the best. Females, I think sometimes that ownership of I'm really good and I'm going to be the best and I'm happy to stand out among my peers can be a challenge at times. Guys, do they have more informal tactical conversations when they're younger? Do they have more informal access to skill when they're younger? As females, do we underestimate them from a tactical coaching point of view? And we'll come to that a little bit later. So how they're socialized and treated, and the culture around female sport as young players and as teenage players. Do we use different language? Do we have different expectations, which changes how we treat female players when maybe it doesn't need to? And then I guess the last one there, so in a guy's dressing room, that in your face kind of motivationally intense push attitude, or communication style, often in a female dressing room, that doesn't work because it doesn't wash with female players. They don't respond. It doesn't bring out the best in them. So they're just some I suppose comparisons. And if it all comes back to the idea is it may just be what's socially and culturally accepted within a gang of young men and a gang of young women. So lads kind of can have the argument and move on. Girls tend to hold on to it a little bit more, I think. So we're going to talk about three main things now. We're going to talk about competitiveness, physicality, and communication. And we're going to dig into them a little bit deeper based on what we've just discussed. So first of all, competitiveness. So that idea of the social norm and what's expected. So don't think that female athletes aren't competitive. They absolutely are, but it's how we draw it out of them. It's how we give them permission to be competitive. So I think what works in a female environment is competitiveness comes through encouragement and motivation. It comes through positivity rather than sort of being divisive within the group. And the big thing is that girls do not like to be, or that there's a fear of being the unliked character. You'll see it on the screen, the word I put up there, the B word, let's call it. They don't like pointing out mistakes or causing errors. That they want everything to be cohesive. So in terms of being competitive, the group nearly needs to grant permission for everybody, each individual. Okay, I know if I am competitive here in this training session, there's going to be no repercussions. I'm not going to be walking home or tomorrow and hear that, oh, Mary said that you were too intense at training last night. So it has to be a collective agreement that competitiveness is okay and you're not the outlier. The next one's physicality. So the best example I can give of this, I was at a camp last summer, and I had under 12 boys for maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes, followed by under 12 girls. And I was to do athletic development stuff, right? So but kind of fun athletic development activities. And we were doing races and different things. I ended up with the lads doing sort of little physical challenges where they had to kind of guard a cone from each other. And then when I blew the whistle, they had to race up 20 meters. Now, by the end of it, all they wanted to do was roll around and wrestle with each other. That's pretty much all they wanted to do. And they were delighted with life. They raced and it was all very competitive and great crack and everyone was having great fun. The girls, 40 minutes later, that sort of rough and tumble was just alien to them, absolutely alien. And it doesn't play as big a part in when young girls are growing up. They don't have that same exposure to that informal physicality bouncing off each other. And I think that's why when it comes to sport and you're saying go for the ball, that they find it difficult, and that as coaches we need to, I suppose, teach them how and make them comfortable with physicality and introduce it in a very controlled manner. And Orla's going to go into practical examples of that. So the worst thing that we can do is make them feel like there's something wrong with them for having a discomfort with physicality. And this ties into retention, because what usually happens is Okay, well, why don't you go for the ball? Mary, you need to go for the ball. Mary's uncomfortable. So then she thinks, oh, well, sports is really physical, and I find that very difficult. Sport isn't for me, and I'm going to leave my team. So we have to teach, help, support young girls deal with and just get comfortable with physicality, because they miss that socialization window or that cultural window earlier on. It doesn't happen for them in the playground as such. The last one then is communication. So I divided into this 2 areas. So coach to players. So we all talk about the why. So female athletes will ask why, and that is a challenge for coaches, because in your communication, you better have detail, you better have clarity, and it better be consistent. So you can't give one message this week and then another message next week, and then you'll have half a dressing room going, hey, she said that last week something totally different. So they will remember and question. So if you fall down on detail and clarity and you are inconsistent, that's when you lose that trust, you lose that you lose the backing, I suppose, because they're getting mixed messages, and nobody likes that at all. And then I suppose all the other stuff is the teach rather than tell. I mean, that's a general coaching piece or coaching best practice. So if you find yourself standing in a room telling, then there's something wrong. If we want to empower players and get them to learn and be students of the game, then we shouldn't be doing all the telling. There has to be a teaching. And the final 2 pieces on communication from coach to players is that confrontation and challenging communication often doesn't bring out the best. You know, you see with guys, it can be more eyeball to eyeball, and that can be a motivating factor, or it's more tolerated in a male dressing room. And I think it doesn't wash in a female dressing room. It makes people uncomfortable. Even the good players makes them absolutely uncomfortable. So that group agreement on standards and expectations, that is much more effective. And then from player to player. So yeah, player to player. We talked about empowering them. So how do you empower players to communicate well to each other? And I've called it collaborative communication. So if you think of the example of an inside forward and a midfielder, and one variation of communication, she doesn't get the ball, the inside forward, send that ball into me, send that bloody ball into me, versus, and that one is confrontational. That one is just, it's negative, it's somebody's at fault, versus, okay, so I'm the inside forward, I think I'm making good runs, but you're not passing me the ball. Is my run not suiting you, or are you not seeing me, or how are we not linking up together, and what can we do better? What do I need to do better? So that's a way more productive conversation, and it's tactical and it's technical. So you're bringing in all sorts of aspects of the game. So if you can facilitate those conversations within your coaching environment, then you're on to a winner. And you may need to facilitate those and teach the players how to start having those conversations. And the other way in a female dressing room, that sort of, it can be hard to speak up with a group of 25 and a group of 30 or in a big group. So again, think of schoolyards, girls in schoolyards, they prefer smaller groups. So having smaller groups within your team, and part of that is your job is, if I'm struggling to meet one of our agreed standards, well then my first port of call should be my little group saying, listen, I'm really struggling with this bit, or I find that aspect of training really hard. Can you help me? So facilitate, encourage, give opportunities to ask for help and to communicate with each other. So that's, I suppose, an overview of 3 main areas: competitiveness, physicality, and communication, which we think are really important areas to reflect upon in terms of thinking, is there a difference between the male and the female athlete? Well, now, as Peter said, we've put in a few questions. So there were 2 questions that we had a look at. So one was, should you spend the same time on skills with females, or is there a difference in terms of skills? And then another one, do you approach tactics differently with males and females? So I thought this was a good visual to kind of set the scene for that. So in relation to the demands of our games, camogie, football, hurling, lads football, it's the same in my book. So 4 quadrants, 25% technical, tactical, physical, and psychosocial. And you see these sort of divisions all over the place. Now, from a technical side technical point of view, solo, kicking left and right, striking left and right. There is no reason why a female athlete can't be as technically proficient as a male athlete. Zero reason, no physiological reason at all, right? So there does not have to be a difference. But go back to the socialization piece. So do females have less informal exposure to skills growing up? Are they less comfortable with it? Do we presume that they're not as skillful, as technically proficient? So do you know what, I won't bother teaching them how to strike off their left or their non-dominant side or kick with their left foot, because we'll just focus on the right. Do we have lesser standards? And that's a question. And I think sometimes we do, because we feel like maybe we'll just focus on the bigger picture, but aren't skills one of the most of paramount importance to the game and to somebody feeling proficient? And then from the tactical point of view, again, so examples, playing with width, attacking play, what's defensive positioning? Cognitively, there shouldn't be any difference between a male and a female athlete. And there's no reason why you can't have the same tactical approach or communicate, or the same tactical emphasis, let's say, with male and female athletes. So what is there a difference? And maybe it's the same point. Maybe females have had less informal exposure to tactical conversations. Maybe how we communicate them, we need to change for females. Maybe we need to be more clear rather than just throw it out. You got to play with width. You know, maybe, well, why? Clarity, detail, consistency, all of those things. So there's no reason why you can't have the same tactical emphasis with female athletes. On the physical side of things, there are physiological differences. That doesn't mean females can't be held to high standards or that they aren't as fit as males, but there are physiological differences. So if you took a 1K test, for example, the normative data for lads, so their standards would be different to the female standards. So that's the only difference there. It doesn't mean that they can't do endurance, so they can't do speed and power. It should be the same approaches, the same underlying principles. The big difference then maybe is the psychosocial bit, and we tried to address that earlier on, or we reflected on that earlier on. So is there social and cultural differences between a team environment for females and males that mean that we have to communicate or create a slightly different environment to bring out the best, to bring out competitiveness and physicality and ambition and all of that type of stuff? So it's not that there's anything wrong with female athletes or they're not suited to competitive sport or anything like that, which we all know, but some of our frustrations, maybe we just need to approach things or communicate slightly differently. Another big area of questions we had was around retention. So how do you retain teenage girls? It's really topical at the minute. And then also around players playing up. So I suppose the first one generally around retention, and this slide I think is unbelievably important, because I don't know how many times in coach education I've thrown out stuff about you know, you have to make it fun, blah, blah, blah. But what does that actually mean? And this is research from Amanda Visick, and there's a link to it at the end of this presentation. But in terms of retention, like sport should be, in my opinion, a playground. Everyone should be having fun. And fun can be, as you'll see that's outlined in this research, it can be training hard, it can be being challenged, it can be all of those sort of things. So I would encourage you to look at that, and different aspects of fun are appropriate at different age groups. But having consciously ticking some of those fun boxes or the appropriate ones at different age groups is really, really important. And I think that, I believe, is the key to retention for younger players. And then the other area is playing up. So this is a really, really interesting one. And I think historically it's been a numbers game in Ladies Football's Club and probably Camogie Club as well. So we have been working off smaller numbers. So we need to kick players up to keep the adult team going. But I suppose I came up with six questions on this for us to reflect on. So are we rushing players up for the wrong reason? Is it going to benefit them? And how do we pick the players? If we only have a panel of 13 and we're pushing, so we need some of our teenage players to play up. How do we pick them? Do we pick the one that is skillfully most proficient, or do we pick the one that might have the best attitude and maybe would be best able to cope with the adult training environment? Because what often happens, the adult players get annoyed because the younger players are giddy or maybe not taking it seriously, and then you've got a split in the camp. So how do you pick which ones go up? And if you pick the skillful player that has all the talent in the world, but maybe isn't the most committed, but you think, oh, she's great and she might get us a goal or two in the championship or whatever. But if you've just added another team dragging out of her and she's already not the most committed, are you just adding more stress and another issue to deal with for her? The other thing is, who's more important? Your peripheral players on your adult team, presuming they're committed and they're showing up, or your underage star? Again, retention. We always think of retention as our younger players, as our teenagers, but what about retention of our peripheral adult players? What's more important there? And then 5 and 6, I suppose, should an adult team ideally be full of adults? That's a really important question. And if because we are doing a bit of a comparison between male and female today, think about a men's dressing room. Would there be a 16-year-old in a senior dressing room in a men's environment? Not a chance. Part of the reason people say is physicality. Okay, so a difference between a 16-year-old boy and a 22-year-old man can be quite big. So there is a physicality question there. But what about socially? Is it appropriate for 16-year-olds to be in an adult dressing room? Would an adult team not prefer to be just adults? Now that I do understand, there's a little asterisk beside this, that I know that sometimes it's just a numbers game. And if it's a numbers game, what I'd ask you to think about is, what criteria do you use to pick the players that you ask to play up? Is it based on their technical ability because they're just fast or whatever? Or is it based on their psychological, mental ability to be comfortable in a adult dressing room? Because that's really important. That young player has to be able to be comfortable and not be put off by the adult team. So that, I suppose, is setting the scene and a bit of context around differences between male and female athletes and preconceptions. Orlaith's going to take over now, and she's going to talk about some of those aspects in a real life context.
Yeah, thanks, Cliodhna. I'm going to build on what Cliodhna was talking about there around, you know, socially how females interact and what that looks like in a team environment, really. And so I'm going to try and use some practical examples, some real life experiences that I've been faced with and teams that I've worked with, and just kind of give you some idea around things that I've done with them and how it's worked and maybe what's come out of them. And I agree with Cliodhna in everything that she said, and I've put in this picture of Cora here just because I think it was a good image to kind of show that, you know, females are able to have those same emotions as males. You know, they're able to be just as competitive. I've never worked with Cora. I've never worked with the Mayo team. It was a good image to use here. But female teams that I have worked with, you know, they are extremely competitive. You know, they have that drive. They want to win. All of them want to win. They want to be really good at their sport. But the one thing that I found, you know, across the board with female teams that I've worked with is that they bring encouragement and drive to the pitch in a more positive manner. They want to push each other in a positive way. They kind of struggle with that whole confrontation end that Cliodhna was talking about, where it's, you know, if that effort isn't being put in, or if the standards aren't being met, it's kind of they'll go moan behind each other's back and give out maybe the next day, or on the way home in the car, or there'll be texts flying later on. So they don't necessarily struggle with being competitive. What they do maybe struggle with is bringing that competitiveness of, you know, calling out those errors or raising the standards, and maybe that's down to just socially what they're used to, and they might not be as comfortable with that confrontation. So what I'm going to give you examples of is maybe different things that I've done off the pitch with a couple of teams that I've worked with, just to try and encourage that more on the pitch, to try and get them to be comfortable around that area. So, and it's no different to anything else that you try and create with a team, is that you have to start with that environment, and maybe start with understanding a set of values for your team. And you talk about empowering players, but especially with this type of thing, you want to bring the females into that whole decision process. So empower them to understand, what they want their team to be about. It's no use you coming in as the coach and saying, well, I want you to work on, X, Y, Z. I want these to be our values. They have to live them and you have to live with them. So bringing them into that decision process to set the values, and I put down, a couple of examples here, like trust, accountability, transparency, work ethic, and then when you've set those out with your team, it's up to you then to try and build that and lead it every week, every day that you're working with them. So if we just look at the values that I've put down there, I just want to go through, like, these are some of the ones that I've come across with the teams that I've worked with. And how do we go about maybe using these values then to help build that competitiveness? Okay, so it's not something that you can just decide, right, well, I'm going to make them extremely competitive. They're going to be able to call each other out. They're going to be able to pull each other up when we're not maybe training the way that we want to train. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, and it's something that you need to chip away at and slowly build. So what I've used in the past, and I felt it worked in environments that I've been in, is that starting behind closed doors. So not starting at the face of it. Like, I'm aware of some teams that I've worked with where they haven't been too comfortable in that confrontation zone. So taking it away from that and doing it kind of behind closed doors has kind of worked for me in that way. And if we're going to build on our values, if transparency is one of the values, then if I'm getting them, so as an S&C coach, I'm giving them fitness work to do, I'm giving them strength work to do, and a lot of the times that's off the pitch and that's away from the the team training environment. So if I'm getting them to do that outside of when we're together, then I want to be transparent in showing them who's doing what and how often they're doing it. So that's me just working on that value that they've maybe set out. And then this idea of reinforcing it consistently. Okay, so if we're going to build that environment and if we're going to create this side of competitiveness that we want in them, you want to be able to reinforce it consistently. So I'll give you an example. I make out these weekly reports and I give them to the teams around different player progress or individual sessions or tasks that maybe we've set them to do. So this is just an example of one that I've done with the under-21 hockey girls. And this is, again, it's something that I do every week. It takes a half an hour. If you're working with your local club team, you might not put in this much effort, or you might not think that doing this every week will have too much of an effect. They might wear away, it might wear out or whatever. Make it monthly or once every 2 weeks, but it's just to give you an idea of something that I've done. So what the girls do is they have different bits of training to get done during the week, and they send in selfies into our WhatsApp group, and I'll just keep track of it. And I'll keep track and give them a graph back then on a Monday morning. They get to see, what's happened in the previous week. And the same, they put in their RPE, so they do rate of perceived exertions for every session. Same thing, I'll just track it and send it back to them. And what happens with that then is in the group, it comes in and they can see, okay, well, how come she hasn't done, we were given 4 sessions to do or 5 sessions to do, and how come she hasn't done them, or why has she done none, or why have they not put their evidence into the group? And at the start, it started really well, that it started to get them to buy into that whole training outside of when we're in a group and putting in those extra hard yards that we need to get fitter or whatever it is. And then what started to happen was some of them would start coming to me to say, how come Mary isn't doing the sessions that you're asking her to do? And at the end of the day, I had to go back to them and say, well, it's not for me that she's doing it, it's for you guys, it's for your team, it's to push your standards. So I kind of put it on the players then that they had to start those conversations with the players. And the fact that we were doing it behind closed doors, yes, okay, we might still have had that confrontation element there, but you take away the uncomfortableness of it. Okay, so it was behind closed doors. They were able to pick up the phone or send a text message and kind of bring up the standards that way to push each other a bit more off the pitch. And then we try to keep it a bit fun as well. Like, we do selfies of the week, so I'll pick out, a selfie of the week every week and put it in there. Or sometimes what I'll do is I'll go effort of the week. So if one individual, for example, if they've maybe fallen off a bit for the last month, but I see they're starting to get a bit more involved again, they're starting to send in their sessions again, and they're working that bit harder, I might pick them out and do effort of the week, because just to try and recognize it. And the WOW score is there at the bottom. I'll go through that in a few minutes. We won't worry about that just yet. But that's just an idea of, creating that accountability first of all. So if that's one of the values that they've set out, so we're creating that accountability, and then that transparency, so everybody can see what everybody else is doing. And it encouraged them to begin that process of, starting that conversation when maybe effort isn't there where it should be, or where they're potentially not living up to the standards that the girls have set out. And because I'm starting that behind closed doors, it just creates that environment, a safer environment for them to do it when they're not really comfortable with the confrontation side of it. And like I said about recognizing the behaviors and just being subtle with it. So even if it's a case where somebody has, you know, consistently put in really good work and we get to the pitch and we're having a training session, then I'll recognize that and I'll mention it in front of the group. I'll say, you know, well done to Mary, for example, because she's put in an extremely good effort over the last 4 months and we can all see it in her gameplay. She's gotten fitter, or she's, you know, more switched on in trainings, that type of thing. So just being subtle in how you recognize the positive behaviors, and then allowing the girls then as well to be able to have those conversations around maybe where somebody else might need to pull up their socks. Another thing then is what I started to do was create these mini competitions off the pitch. So again, creating that competitiveness that they all love. They're all competitive, they all want to be winners, they have that drive. But again, having these competitions off the pitch led to me being able to create times where they can have those conversations about that, and again taking away that uncomfortable of doing it in front of each other, and maybe calling each other out in front of each other. So this is just an example of something that we've done with the rugby girls, and we do it with the hockey now as well, but currently in this time, because we're all split up and we can't train together, we do a WOW. So we've called it our weekly workout on a Wednesday. Okay, so what they do is they do a workout, it's a challenge. It's like an example of one we did was they had to do burpees continuously for 2 minutes, then they did a plank for a minute, and then they went back into burpees again for 2 minutes, and the score was how many burpees that they got. So they just added up their reps, for example, and they sent in their scores to me, and we created this leaderboard. And it wasn't the first time that we had done it with the rugby girls. So what happens is they send in the scores, we create this leaderboard and send it back into the group. They can see, you know, where they stand in it. There is some pros and cons to it. Some of the girls don't like to see where they're sitting in the leaderboard some of the times, but it creates those conversations. They're on the phone to each other, they're in a group, they're saying, you know, how come so-and-so got so high, there's no way she could have been doing it right, and we get them to send in the evidence. So they send in their videos of them doing it. Even recently we started to do it on Zoom, just so people can see how everybody else is getting on, and see if they're putting in the effort required. And it started initially back in December, so we would have trained for a period of time leading up to November. We would have had a November international, and we put in a solid couple of months training, and we had our November internationals, and then we were on like a six week break. So not very different to now, where we went from going 100% to nothing. And I was a little bit conscious of, we were going to come back in January and we were going to be getting into a Six Nations campaign, and we had just put in tremendous amount of work. The team had got together and we were really building towards something good. But then we had this break, and I kind of wanted to keep something going. So I went about building this advent calendar. Same idea, you know, it was just something online, didn't take long to do. I just filled in a few boxes and gave them some challenges. So we did 12 challenges in December. So 12 challenges leading up to Christmas. Something as simple as, we had like a sit-up challenge. How many can you do in 30 seconds? Burpee challenge. How many can you do in 30 seconds? We did a fitness test. So one of our normal fitness tests, we did like time trials on a bike, things like that. And what we got out of it is the reason why I'm doing those workouts with them now. But what happened was, the girls, because they have that competitive drive, no different to males, they all wanted to do their utmost best in it. They were competing against themselves. They were competing against maybe girls in similar positions to themselves. And that leaderboard would go up, and yeah, it created a bit of banter. And at the start, they'd send in their videos into the WhatsApp group. So at the start, if somebody was maybe only doing, you know, half efforts on a rep or not completing the rep fully, I'd kind of start to chip away a little bit at it and calling them out on it, like, oh, I can't count those last 3 reps, Sarah, for example. Gotta knock you out 3 reps on that one. Sorry, you go down a peg. And then maybe say to somebody else if the same things happen in one of their videos. And what happened was, the girls started to buy into it a bit more. A couple of times they might message me saying, hey, did you see in so-and-so's video that they weren't doing, you know, whatever the exercise was supposed to be. And so I'd say, okay, well, it's not my job. That's you're gonna have to talk to them and let them know that they're not pulling their weight, they're not completing the reps the way that we're supposed to be doing it. And slowly but surely the girls started to do that. They started to have a comment here or there, you know, say to Emer, for example, Emer, like, you rushed those last 10 reps and you only did them half, so we can only give you 5 reps. You can't get the 10. Is that right, Orla? things like that. And they started to have those conversations while we were off the pitch. You know, it was behind closed doors. They didn't have to be faced with that whole confrontation end. And what happened was then when we came back after Christmas and we got into like our January training and we started building up into the Six Nations again, what I started after that was brought the advent calendar to the pitch essentially, and reminded them of how they were able to go absolutely 100% all out on those challenges, because they were going against each other and they wanted to be the best and they wanted to drive on and push each other in that period. But it's no different to when they're on the pitch. And so we used the advent calendar as almost like a catalyst for that conversation. So they were able to then on the pitch, when things weren't going as well, there was maybe too many drop balls or you know, people weren't getting into the line quick enough, then they were able to say, hey, look, remember over December, you know, when we were doing those challenges and you didn't do it well enough, we called you out, well, we're doing it here. So it was that idea of making them comfortable with bringing up the conversation, because they had not necessarily a reason to do it, but they were able to bring it into the conversation. They had context on it. And I just found it worked really well there. And even like the coaches, for example, sometimes if a training session isn't going as well as they like, they're waiting for the girls and they're waiting for the girls and they're waiting for them to step up and either, you know, stop everything and have that little talk, because at the end of the day on the pitch, the coach can't help you during a game. And for a while, the coaches would have to stop the training and let them know, you know, the standard isn't good enough or this or the other. And then slowly but surely, the girls got the confidence and they started to do it a bit more themselves. So just two ideas on that, and we got a lot of questions in, same as what Cliodhna did. A lot of the questions that came in were around, you know, the current climate that we're in, you know, the issues that we're faced with now, and do you have any ideas of what we can do with teams? And they're just, I suppose, when we were talking about it, like there's some ideas that you can do. There are ideas that I'm still using with the teams that I'm working with at the moment. So, for example, like if you've got teams, whether it's young girls or older girls, give them the likes of a skills challenge and make it scoreable. They love having challenges where they can see where they're at. And if it's scoreable, they can see if they can improve. And I just put in there Google Forms is useful. It's a useful way of tracking. It's really simple. It saves you getting 20 odd texts with scores and having to keep tracking, writing them down. Google Forms is easy. It does it for you. So just something you might look up. But for the likes of a skills challenge, if you're going to do it with one of your teams, make it age appropriate. I mean, for example, like a younger team could be how many strikes on your left in a minute or 30 seconds, how many strikes on your right in 30 seconds, or how many strikes can you get on your right without dropping it, same on your left. And then put that on a leaderboard and put it back to them. Now, if it's a younger girls team and you maybe feel that there might be some confidence issues there around their scores and whatnot, you don't have to show the scores. It could be based on, we're going to do this skill challenge this week, and then next week we're going to repeat it, and the leaderboard could be based on their improvement. So how many reps have they improved by? Or they get a green tick if they have improved, or maybe they get just a blank if they haven't improved yet. So things like that, and it creates that competitive environment for them, especially in this time where they're not getting to get together and have that team training. If you're giving your teams then training sessions to do, and you're not really, like, you want them to be accountable, you want them to keep them motivated and know who's doing what, you can use the likes of those graphs. And again, Google Forms is easy to use there. So you get them to send in what sessions they did and just quickly create a graph and send it back in. You'd be surprised how quickly girls would be like, oh, I don't want to be seen as the one that isn't doing the session, so I'm going to do it. And that kind of helps them to stay a bit motivated as well. And you can use skills challenges, you can use fitness challenges, you know, something as simple as, like, it could be how many burpees in a minute, or it could be, and it depends on what space people have, but if they're 20 meters in the garden, so how many shuttles out and back can you do in a minute or 2 minutes or whatever it is. And then we had a couple of questions come in as well around the number of sessions. So if you've got, say, a senior ladies club team, and how many sessions realistically should we be getting them to do in a week now that we're in this current situation? So we're trying to give them stuff to do. Myself and Cliodhna were talking about it, and we really, like, how I would look at it is, if you have a club team and you normally train maybe twice a week, or maybe you train 2 or 3 times a week, I'd be sticking to that. So give them 2 sessions that week that you want them to get done. maybe add one more, so maybe 3 sessions in the week. But I wouldn't be thinking, okay, well, everybody has all more time on their hands now, so we're going to give them 4, 5, and 6 sessions, because they're just going to break down. And you have to remember as well, a lot of people's worlds have just been turned upside down with all this. There's going to be a lot of mental strain. People probably have financial worries, they probably have job worries, maybe there's more people at home in the house now than there normally is. So you have to remember all of that too, and that can all lead to fatigue and add into the whole idea of fatigue as well. So just be conscious if you're trying to give your players something to do at home in this time. Just be aware not to be going above and beyond what they're normally used to and what they're capable of. Then just something that I'm going to explain a bit further that Cliodhna touched on around that confidence in physicality. So exactly what she said is that you do need to control that environment. Okay, so you want to make it predictable and safe for girls. Okay, so socially, as Cliodhna has alluded to, they necessarily don't have the same rough and tumble that lads have because they don't socially interact that way. And so when you bring it into a training session, you want to be able to make it predictable and safe for them. So start with stationary drills. Okay, so it could be the case of, you know, one person in the drill is stationary and somebody else is coming in with the ball, or maybe the ball is in front of them and they have to come in and try and get it in front of that player, and they get a little touch of contact as well. Next time we might bring in 2 players trying to get it and both of them are moving and you get that contact, but making it predictable where they know what's coming, they know what's about to happen, and when they get used to it and they get more confident with it, or they're exposed to it a bit more, then we can start to make it a bit more unpredictable. But don't get annoyed when the giggling and all that starts. It's just something that they're not used to and they have to get used to it. But it's not something that we can just teach in one session and that's that, or that we can teach in one session and come back to in 3 weeks. If we come back to it in 3 weeks, we probably have to start again. So consistent exposure, but little and often. So maybe doing one drill in every training session. And one conversation that myself and Cliodhna had was around, you know, she asked me about rugby and did I think that in the female aspect of rugby that the same kind of lack of confidence in the physicality end, does it exist? And I suppose when girls come into rugby first, when they're younger, and even now because girls are starting to play that little bit younger as well, it is taught to them in a very predictable and safe manner. Okay, they're taught very stationary to start, and they go through those processes and they learn it. And the big difference between, you know, rugby and GAA, as everyone is probably aware, is that there's a lot of contact in rugby, in a sense that the game can be won and lost around the contact area. So contact is huge and you have to be physically dominant. Whereas in Gaelic football or camogie or in GAA sports, yes, there still is physicality there, but it's a different exposure to physicality. Yes, you do have to be physical, you have to be able to take on a player, you have to be able to get through a player or get around a player, but it's that whole idea of being able to dominate the physical contact area, about being cunning in that contact. So you have to use your physicality because you want to get out of it quicker. Whereas in rugby, you dominate it that bit more. You want to control that physical area and push through boundaries. Whereas in GAA sports, generally you're trying to evade the contact area and be cunning around getting out of it as such. And then we kind of just wanted to touch on just some S&C side of things. We had a few questions come in on this around, you know, when can girls start doing S&C? When can they start doing strength training? And I suppose the big thing that we spoke about when we were preparing this, and something that I definitely agree on, is understanding their training age. So if I had a group of girls, I would have no problem with starting them on some S&C work at 12, 13. It's not something that you shouldn't do that young. You can 100%, but if you have a girl that's 12, 13, and you also have a group of girls that are 16, it doesn't mean that, so say neither teams have been exposed to S&C before, then what I do with the girls that are 12 and 13 might be the exact same as what I do with the girls that are 16, because neither of them have been exposed to it before. Okay, so they're the same training age. So understanding what their training age is. If those girls at 16 have been doing little bits all the way up along from the age of 12, then yeah, I might go a bit more advanced with them. But it's understanding the training age and starting small, and understanding what previous injuries girls have had, so they might need a little bit extra care or attention in certain areas. But keep it simple. You don't have to have these big, broad, extravagant S&C plans. Keeping it simple and being consistent with it. So if we know some areas that are important to work on, so there's a lot of research out there on injuries, and in GAA sports, most of the injuries are in the lower limbs as opposed to the upper limbs, and it's no different between males and females there really. And the same thing, there's a lot of muscular injuries more so than bones and whatnot. So we have to be really cognizant of those areas. So we have to understand that target areas are the likes of the hamstrings, the groins, the calves, and then of course the important joints to look after being the knees and the ankles. But having ideas of ways to target them and giving them that just simple exposures at every training session. So using the likes of the warm-up, if you can teach the players around, you know, what they should be focusing on, what they need to be aware of, and concentrating on those in every session and in your warm-up, and just constantly having that exposure to it, you'll be doing your players a greater service than just throwing them into a gym session. If you can keep them in every training session, just having that little bit of exposure, they'll do really well. And yes, like, I'm an S&C coach, I definitely think having, you know, S&C in a gym and obviously, you know, getting strong is great, but it's not the be all and end all. If we can create robust players and we can keep them robust around injury prevention, then I'm doing a better service for them. I'll just flick through these next few slides. It just gives you ideas around like hamstring exercises. I won't talk you through them, but when you get the presentation, you can click on these links or on the words there, and they'll take you into links and videos on the exercises and how you do them. So they're there for you to look at if you want. But just then a few more questions that had come up. One of them was around sprinting form for camogie players, and myself and Cliodhna spoke about it, and it's something that I've kind of come across a lot in hockey as well. So in hockey, a lot of the girls, they tend to run with two hands on the stick. And then in camogie, you get girls running a lot of times with one hand, sometimes with two. And yes, of course, it's going to affect their running form. So a lot of the questions were around, you know, should we be trying to fix running form in camogie players or sprinting form in camogie players, and how do we improve that? But my question is, does it have to be perfect running form? If you think about it in a case of a camogie player on a pitch, they're trying to manipulate themselves, the stick and the ball. Okay, so you're not gonna have that perfect running form. If I'm trying to manipulate a stick and trying to get down into low positions, trying to pick up a ball, trying to evade a player, even you can see in the picture there, you've got one girl that's chasing, almost getting into a lunging pattern as she's about to get in to try and get the sliotar. So is the challenge to try and improve that perfect running form, or are we trying to get them into good athletic positions to be able to adapt and manipulate different environments or different challenges within their sport? So in the likes of camogie, and the same with hockey, we're always trying to get into those low positions. We're always trying to get away from players, and having a stick in your hand just makes it that little bit different. And from my personal opinion anyway, I don't feel like we should be trying to get perfect running form with a stick in hand, because realistically in a game, it's not generally going to happen like that. And then a couple of other questions were around, you know, fitness levels for female athletes, and I tried to research a bit around GPS and what the game demands are in camogie and in ladies football. And there's not a lot of research out there at the moment, but there's some simple messages that you don't need to have that research for, really. If you think about either younger players or, you know, older players or adult players, you need to consider that if we're going to do a 60-minute training session, realistically, I just want them to be active for as long as possible. Okay, I don't want to be there for 60 minutes of a training session and 30 minutes of that is standing and talking. Okay, so some research that I did before in rugby was around training versus matches and looking at that GPS and what we were doing in training sessions compared to what we were doing in games, and we weren't really meeting the game demands in our training sessions. And a lot of it came down to us taking breaks that were too long and spending too much time talking. So the big thing around, you know, being clear on what your session plan is about. So having planned sessions, taking short breaks, using less talk, and talk for a minute but no more. If you're going to be talking for a minute that turns into 4 minutes, the girls are standing around, heart rate starts to come down, then they have to get their heart rate back up again if they want to be getting into that whole, you know, either playing under fatigue or stressing the physiological systems. Using simple messages and being consistent with it in your short breaks, so understanding exactly what you want to say and sticking with it. You know, use games, use the likes of small-sided games, use match scenarios to try and replicate your game demands. And you can split that with some physical drills like fitness stuff or races, or even with skills drills drills, and then back into a game again, and just keep them active and keep them going, as opposed to spending half your time talking unaware. And then, so here's just some general resources. We've got the GA15 is in there. It's a really good, just to back up what I was saying earlier, it's a really good warm-up resource to have. And then the bottom one, number 6, is that fun retention slide that Cliodhna put out. And there's a few other ones there, like there's the first one there, Changing the Game podcast, is it's a really good one around the difference between coaching girls and boys as well. And the same, there's a few more resources there that you can look at later on if you want.
So, Peter, how are we doing for time now? There's maybe a couple of more questions I see have come in. Do we want to do a little quick fire round on them, or how are we doing? Peter is not there. Okay, so we might. Sorry,
Cliodhna.
Yeah.
We have about 10 minutes left, so yeah, we will go through a few questions now, if that's okay. So, Orla is on the screen now, and what I might try and do, let's see, can that work? No, I can't put you on. So what we can do maybe is direct a couple of questions to Orla, and then maybe switch around, put you up, and let you answer a few questions then as well. Is that okay?
Yeah, whatever you want, yeah.
Or if you're happier, we can just go with both you speaking off camera and Orla both on and off.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't mind. So I've actually noted down a few here. So to give Orla a break, maybe I'll fire out a few answers. So there's one here from DJ. I feel like I'm a radio host here, you know, one here from DJ about session planning, and what does the day look like? Do you, the day of a session, do you write your session down? Do you memorize it? And I would be a stickler for writing my session down, to be honest. And I never have a problem with producing. I have a really small notebook. It's about the size of a wallet that I always have in my pocket on the pitch, and I never have any embarrassment with pulling that out on the pitch, because I'd rather my players know that I'm planned. If I forget something, or I'm thinking, oh, where am I going next, or what was the key point in this drill, I've no problem pulling that out on a pitch. For me, every training session has a theme. So what specifically am I looking for in this training session? So that can be, if it's an agility thing, I might be focusing on a particular change of direction skill, or if I'm generally coaching football, let's say, it'd be execution of the kick pass. So I know exactly what I'm looking for in the training session. And something that I've started doing the last couple of years, and it ties in with that, teaching rather than telling, is that on my session plans, I will have down planned questions. So around a drill, if I know what I'm trying to get out of a drill, I will have written down, ask the players this, or if you see this in the drill, ask them to reflect upon X. So we always plan out our tactical side, or our technical side of things, or the physical side of things. Oh, my run has to be 10 meters, or it has to be 20 meters with a change of direction. But how often do we specifically plan the psychosocial side of it? How am I going to get these players to engage? So that's an important part of session planning for me, and I definitely write it down. There were some other ones about an example of a physicality drill. So, and Orla mentioned this, and this one I find it, and it's so simple, but I find it really, really effective. So I have a passer and a receiver, and this is hurling or football, or camogie or football. So maybe 10, 15 meters between the passer and the receiver. The receiver has to stand still. They're not really in the drill. They're just standing there, not moving, waiting for the ball. And I have someone 2 steps behind the receiver, waiting to basically go in and steal it. They know where the ball is going. They know that player isn't going to move. Once the pass is made, their job is to get in around the player in front and steal the ball. Now, what happens? They go kind of half go for it. Oh, sorry, they knock off each other. They start laughing. Oh dear. And it takes ages for them to get comfortable with it. But that idea of just practice going for the ball when you're at a disadvantage, practice knocking into somebody and not stopping to apologize for it. So it can be a challenge to, I suppose, give permission for that to happen in a training session. And as Orla alluded to, little and often, think of little ways where the contact is predictable and there's no problem. You're just getting used to it. That's all. There's nothing wrong with you if you find it a little bit uncomfortable. 2 more questions that jumped out at me. Generally speaking, is it a good idea for younger players to play up? this is one of those irritating times where I'm going to say it depends. So it absolutely does depend, because, and I go back to why. Why do we want them to play up? Often it's because they're technically very good, or they're fit, or so they've got all the skills, and we think that she's well able. Up she goes, up she goes. But I'll always come back to, is she going to be comfortable? If my general rule is, if they're good enough and they enjoy it, absolutely they can play with an older team. But is she going to be comfortable? And if we want to lengthen people's playing careers in ladies football and camogie, if I start playing for the adult team at 16, am I going to enjoy it when I'm 22, or am I going to feel like, oh, do you know what, I've already been there, I've done that, I've done the adult team already, and now I'm going to move on to something else at 22. I go to college and I feel like, well, I've kind of done it all. So do we need to rush players up through the age groups if it's not a fight for survival based on numbers? And really ask yourself the question from a psychosocial point of view, is it the best thing for the player? Will they be comfortable up there, or will they be put off? And then one more, bored kids. So how do you deal with kids who say that they're bored at training sessions? So I'd say we've all had that one. And my initial response is, like, me as a coach, that's on me. And that comes back to my concept of, if you see a kid in a playground, they're laughing, they're joking, they're running around, they're having the time of their lives. And especially kids, I think that sport should elicit the same response. So they should be out and about having the time of their lives. And it's up to us as coaches to create that. And I think when kids are bored, it's because potentially we've made it too serious, or we've made it too structured. And they think, oh, well, I'm doing the same thing and I'm running from the red cone to the blue cone over and over again. So I think we need to meet them where they're at a bit more, and be a bit more excited about training, and make training a little bit more exciting for them, and a little bit more playground-like. If you videoed your training session and it looks serious and ordered and structured, but everybody's doing exactly as you tell them to do, versus a video of it and it looks like they're all running around having a great time, I would say the second one is more appropriate for kids, or you're probably going to get a better response out of them. So they were just 4 questions, Peter, that I picked out of the list. I don't know, what you want to take over a few there?
I have just a couple there that I got through that maybe that Orla might come to, if that's okay. And Cliodhna, if you want to comment and jump in as well, that's perfectly fine. Terence McWilliams, just a query: are females easier to manage but harder to coach?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I think it depends on the team. I've had some teams that have been really easy to manage and some that haven't. It's not so much that they're easy to manage and hard to coach. It's how you coach them. I think that everyone learns differently, and it's how you approach it really with them. If you communicate with the girls well enough, and if you're clear and consistent in your messages, and you can get across to them why they're doing something, if you can get across what they have to do simply, and stay repetitive with it, I don't think they're going to be difficult to coach. It's how you target what you're coaching them. That'll be my answer on it anyway.
Cliodhna, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, like I think that nature of I suppose female athletes to be why. Because I think with male athletes often, and especially in team sport environment, you can lean on the physicality of it, and they want to go out there and they want to play, and you just push that all the time. And I think with the female athletes, with them asking, well, why are we doing this? It means as a coach, you've got to be on point and you've got to have an answer. And you feel like, well, are they challenging me because they're asking why? They're not challenging you, but they're just because they want to know, because they want to know better. So sometimes we see it as they're making my job difficult. They're not coachable. Well, I think if we communicate in a really clear, straightforward, consistent way with female athletes, they are exceptionally coachable.
Maybe just a couple more, and Cliodhna, I might start with you for this one. In your experience, do female athletes respond differently to male and female coaches?
Okay, do female athletes respond differently to male and female coaches? I think it depends on the personality of the coach. I think they can. I think the dynamic can be different. I think sometimes I've seen female coaches nearly be really, really tough on female athletes and female players. I've seen male coaches set the bar too low, and sort of not have the same standards or same expectations of potential. And I think that with female coaches, it can be slightly different. It can be, they can open up a little bit more. They can be sometimes less intimidated. It can be I suppose it's seen as a more collaborative environment, but a lot of it depends on personality, to be honest with you. I think personality is a big thing. And one point I made at a coaching course a while ago, there were a number of new female coaches in the room, and they were kind of mammies, mothers of girls that were playing, and saying, well, I'm just there really as the FLO, and I carry the water bottles and I do that. I'm just there because that's my role. And I never really played football, so I don't really have anything to offer. And I was like, are you joking me? Are you absolutely joking me? Of course you have something to offer. So the guy that you're coaching with may know football inside out, but he wasn't a 15-year-old girl. You were. You know 15-year-old girls inside out. And if we're saying that the importance is all about, or one of the important things is all about communication in the environment, well, you can have a massive impact on setting up that environment. And really learning the technical points of a solo is the easy thing for you to do as a coach. So I think sometimes I know I'm slightly off point, but somebody who's filling the FLO role in teams often can be overlooked from what they can bring to a coaching environment.
Orla, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I agree with Cliodhna, and there's been times where I've been working with, obviously in a male-dominated environment where it's been with a female team, but there's been a lot of male coaches in the environment. There's a few times where I've had conversations with those coaches just to bring their awareness around to maybe why not a certain thing isn't working, but hey, let's take this approach because I think the girls might react a bit better to it. So I don't think, a female, even if their role as a manager or as an FLO, like, they shouldn't underestimate definitely their understanding of a group of girls. And maybe how they might react, and even if you're coming up with ideas around bonding and how the girls can work together better as a team, even if it is off the pitch, having that great insight in, you've been there before, maybe not as a sports person, but you've been there before as a teenager or a young girl in a group of other girls, and maybe what they might best react to. So even if you don't have the football or the hurling knowledge, you might have other knowledge around that you can bring into it, definitely.
Last question, and Orla, we'll start with you as you're on screen. And it's more of a comment from Teddy Regan. Traditionally, girls had less role models in top class sport, and he talks about thankfully that might be changing in the 20 by 20 program that's ongoing. What maybe are your hopes for such role models in the future? Yeah,
definitely. Like, I think, and 20 by 20 have put out some really good videos on it, where they've asked girls who their role models are, and or who their female role models are, and they're not able to name them. So, like, when I think back to when I was younger as well, growing up and wanting to play hurling and wanting to, be a sports star or whatever, I wanted to be like the lads that I saw on telly. I wanted to be like those type of players. And I'd love for myself, when I was that age, to be growing up saying I wanted to be like some of the female role models that are out there. And it's not that they weren't there back then, I just didn't know about them. And that's the one great thing that I think is happening with 20 by 20 is it is becoming more visible. Girls are seeing role models that are females that are out there, and this whole retention debate that goes on and girls maybe dropping out of sport. I hope that if there's more female role models out there, that'll start to reverse a little bit, or at least slow down a little bit, because they might want to stay on the course that little bit longer to hopefully try and better themselves and follow in the footsteps of their role models. I mean, you can even see, just from my point of view of hockey, because I work in that area as well, as soon as those girls that they did what they did in the World Cup and got the silver medals, and they were postered everywhere, and they were on the news, and they were on the Late, and they were on TV everywhere, the numbers in hockey just started to rise. And those girls, because they see it and they can follow what they've done, and they might end up loving hockey, they might drop out of it and get into a different sport, but if they can stay the course or get into that sport and realize that they enjoy it, and they maybe got into it because they saw those girls on TV, then if that can keep happening, then I think it's great.
Cliodhna, do you want to come in? Last word on that?
Yeah, I agree with Orla from the elite sport point of view, but I also think we overlook a couple of other aspects of role models. So if we want retention and to keep our game numbers growing, there is no stronger role model than a young girl seeing her mother in her 30s, 40s, 50s putting on a pair of runners or a pair of boots and going out to play. And that woman of that age group making that a priority, that I'm going to stay physically active or I'm going to stay playing my sport. That is an incredibly powerful thing for a young girl to see, that this is life. It doesn't have to always be elite. It can be just a participation role model that it is of importance. And the other aspect is, I suppose, myself and Orla, like, we're coaches. So I think that's another aspect of role modeling that we don't see. I coach with two men, a football team, a club football team, and both of them nearly always bring their daughters and sons to training, and that they go to school together, the same age, so they're out coaching and their sons and daughters are on the sideline playing away, kicking a ball around as the training session is going on. Now, those two lads are really comfortable doing that, and it's great. It works out logistically. So again, wouldn't that be a really powerful thing? So Mammy goes up to coach the local football, camogie team, rugby, whatever, and her kids come along for the journey and play on the sideline. So I think when we think about role models, don't ever underestimate, if you're a woman involved in a local club, either coaching, administrating, or still playing, the power of that role model on your young children or your sisters or whatever.
Thanks, Cliodhna. I think a great message to sort of finish off the session. And I think we're lucky to have two extremely capable role models for female coaches with us tonight. I want to just say thanks to Cliodhna and Orla for all the effort they put in over the last, I suppose, a couple of weeks now at this stage since we've been having a chat about this session. You can see from the work that they've done, they've raised the bar for every other speaker that we're going to have in the next few weeks, and certainly changed a few things that we're going to do around Q&As and how we're going to try and manage those better. So thanks, Cliodhna, and thanks, Orla. For everybody on the call, we have all the materials from Cliodhna and Orla's presentation tonight and the video of it. The presentation is already available on the GA Learning site, and the video will be edited starting tomorrow morning. Hopefully be up on the GA Learning YouTube and on the Learning website by the end of this week. We have our second session this week starting on Thursday evening, and we have Shane Keegan, who's a sports coach, freelance journalist, former manager of Wexford Youths and Galway United, as well as coach and I suppose maybe coaching consultant to a vast array of GA clubs and county squads around the country. And I think one of the interesting things that you learn when you're involved with some of these coaches is how much that they spread their knowledge and information around. And Shane is going to talk to us about what he has learned across various different sports and how he has brought that into his own coaching and what he now tries to achieve. So the registration for that session is now open on the GA Learning site, the same page that you would have registered on previously. So just for the final time, I want to say thanks to Cliodhna and Orla, and say thank you to everyone for coming on the call, and hopefully we'll see you all again on Thursday evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.